In this Tech Talk, I'm chatting about diversity, equity, and inclusion with two leaders at Kwik Lok, co-owner Stephanie Jackson and Chief People Officer Christy Pettey. Thank you both for joining me today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, great to be here. Thank you, Jordan.
So I want to pose my first question to you, Stephanie, and it's kind of about this bigger picture vision of DEI at Kwik Lok. Your company has become a really big champion of this topic. Can you share why DEI is so important to you and how it's part of your leadership strategy?
We're very people focused at Kwik Lok, and we've made people our highest priority. And doing this kind of work really, if you create a culture doing this kind of work, it helps people, all people, thrive and flourish. You know, the data shows that when people are more engaged and feel that they belong, they just are more creative and more innovative. And so we realize that people are at the core of this work.
Absolutely. Now, Christy, what are the nuts and bolts of implementing this commitment to DEI?
So when I joined, the owners and I went through an exercise talking about how would we describe the culture of the company ideally in 10 years, and then identified the biggest gaps between the current culture and where we wanted it to be, and then planned initiatives in those areas. So what we've done since then are kind of the bigger initiatives. We've revamped our hiring process so that it would be more attractive to diverse candidates. It'd have a further reach. We had position descriptions that had requirements on them that really excluded people, maybe that were smaller, which definitely excluded one gender more than another. And we really looked at the requirements of those positions to say, you know, do they need to be able to lift this amount of weight? Are there ways that we can help with that so that we can widen the applicant pool? And it really helped us to rethink what's a requirement and what are we just used to because it's always been like that. We set up a computer-based learning system for employee development, and now we're working on employee development planning and goal setting, and really started working on how to help people feel included and appreciated in all of those processes. And one of the biggest gaps was in setting expectations and holding people accountable consistently. So a lot of these, while they were process oriented, also helped with how we interact behaviorally in those areas. Because if you're talking about performance, you're talking about expectations. When we ask employees to rate their own performance, that helps us understand what their expectations for themselves are and whether those are aligned.
That sounds like a really big roadmap. And another program that I'm interested to hear more about is this DuoLingo program that's kind of helped fill in some of those gaps with some of the Spanish speaking workers and communities that you're a part of as a company.
Yeah, that was super exciting. What happened was in Yakima, we realized that our local demographics versus the demographics of the Yakima plant weren't really aligned. And even the pipeline of candidates coming in didn't represent the demographics of the location. And as we looked into why that was, it's because there are a lot of people who have limited English proficiency. So if we're posting positions in English, we're not getting them. And we have an HR representative who's fantastic, took that idea, ran with it, is getting all of the employment information, onboarding, recruiting, translated into Spanish so that we can support employees that have limited English proficiency. And in doing so came up with, hey, let's offer English classes so we can help those people learn to speak English better. And the response was yes, and a bunch of English speaking employees saying, we want to learn Spanish so we can speak to them better too, and to some of our customers. So we got set up with DuoLingo, like you said, and geez, within 2 months, we had 40 employees signed up from all 6 of our locations. In fact, I think even a salesperson from a 7th location, and all departments are represented. And I think it was about half, if I remember correctly, Stephanie, that said it was something to do with business, talking to coworkers, talking to customers, talking to vendors, you know, being able to work with techs better. And they're averaging an hour a week learning the languages online over 500 hours just in the last couple of months. It's been amazing.
Wow. That's an incredible, really tangible example of how some of these DEI initiatives can work. Not only bringing employees on board, but also having them be champions of some of these initiatives.
Right.
And if I could add to that story, is that that whole idea actually came from an employee who noticed that we weren't, offering,
Yep.
this next language in our home base where there is more Spanish speaking.
Yep.
And he brought it up, which right there shows that he already felt comfortable to bring an idea. His voice mattered. That's the work in progress of DEI. Like when measurement is an employee brought an idea, and then our wonderful team at Kwik Lok just grabbed it and ran with it.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to this new world of work that we're in right now, where employee engagement and having employees really feel valued is more important now than ever before, especially as we're seeing labor shortages and where it's hard to not only find workers, but also to keep them around. And programs like this are just really creative ways to support employee well-being. I'm curious to hear both of your thoughts on this role that DEI plays in fostering that kind of company culture where employees feel valued and engaged.
One of the important things is when you are starting this work, there are words, right? At first, diversity, equity, inclusion, and the organization really would benefit on defining what those words mean to their own organization. So they're not just words. One of the things that we talk about is creating a culture at Kwik Lok that everybody feels that they matter. And so we just needed to give behaviors on what our culture we want. If we're doing our culture well, this is the behaviors that are happening. We have formed different employee steering committees. And the purpose of that is, again, to have the voices of the employees to know if a lot of the different things that we are trying to do, like our intent is really great, but is the impact really landing and making sense and really involving and thinking about everybody. And so these employee steering committees get a sampling of our entire organization, and they get to work on a different topic. They get to have a chance to talk about ideas, what's making sense to them. Maybe they need a little bit more context, or again, maybe a why of why we're doing things. That's a big, and so these employee steering committees really offer that engaged, feeling valuable and belonging.
So the one last summer, the employee steering committee from last summer was about the vision and mission. Like Stephanie said, what makes sense, what doesn't, how are you connecting with this? How can we represent it better? Where do you have questions? And we had several, I would say, employees volunteer for that, but a lot of people who were a little bit concerned about sharing their ideas and opinions. And a year later, we had so many people volunteer that we had to make subcommittees because we didn't have seats for all of them. And they're going to go back and be liaisons for their location and department. So they really will be leading a lot of the efforts to, implement changes in the culture in their locations.
Wow, I love to hear that. And I think that really speaks to the I in DEI, where everybody has a voice, of course, but this is the kind of work that companies really need to do to be intentional about making sure those voices are heard.
Yeah, I like that you say that, because I think people are a lot more likely to embrace change if they're part of the decision-making progress, if they kind of have a say in how it impacts them.
So my last question for you both is one that speaks directly to the bakers that are watching this Tech Talk. Why is this an issue that they should care about, and how should they bring it into their own workplaces? Do you have any best practices that you can recommend for doing that?
Well, I would say is that this work is needs to be intentional. And so I would suggest that, if an organization feels that, hey, this is the way we want to go, then from there, it really is a top down. It needs to be talked about from the leaders.
Mhm.
and not just, hey, we're going to do this, mandate it, we want to check boxes. For real buy-in, like Christy was saying, is people need to hear why we are doing this, and they need to hear it from the leaders. And that happens through storytelling. That happens through telling your own personal narrative about why this work is important. It is a great time for self-reflection to say, hey, are we providing a culture here that people, once we get them here, that's one thing, but how do we keep them here is another.
Mhm.
And we do that through inviting them to have a voice, asking, for them to be part of things, being open to new ways of doing things. It's also about, getting your ego out of it and having some good self-reflection. And so telling your own stories about it has been a great way, I would suggest, to do this work really intentionally.
I think especially right now, there are a lot of improvements in the DEI arena that take time and effort, but not money. And they really improve employee engagement, which, like we've said, we've seen tangible improvements from that and innovative ideas that are going to help push us to the next level. And I think if people will take the opportunity to take some actions in DEI, they'll see benefit when they might not have CapEx to do other big projects. So my recommendation is, first, no, it's not a clean, cut and dry process. It is messy because you're dealing with people and many, many, many different perspectives and many people's emotional responses. But don't let it overwhelm you. Just set your intention. Like Stephanie said, what direction do you want to go? Choose your first couple of actions and start moving forward.
And I think that is a fantastic note to end on. And I really admire the work that your team is doing to push the thought leadership in this arena. So Stephanie and Christy, thank you again for joining me today in this conversation. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks, Jordan.
Thank you so much, Jordan.